Students spend much of their time studying and revising information in preparation for exams. However, this brings to question, what are the best ways to prepare for an exam, and which study methods are the most effective? Hello, my name is Cristina Iordache. I am a grade 11 student from Edmonton, Canada, and my research topic is the effects of study techniques on university student learning. There are methods of learning that are more effective in aiding retention of knowledge than others. Being aware of which strategies can help or hinder learning is crucial, especially for students attending university. For the purpose of this study, the word learning is defined in the context of post-secondary education as the ability to recall information. Within the brain, learning is the process of constructing neural connections between what is being learned and what has already been learned. In this study, 4 learning strategies are discussed: practice testing, highlighting and underlining, summarizing and note-taking, and spaced repetition. While there are many other study techniques available, such as rereading, memorization, and re-listening to lectures, these 4 study techniques were chosen as they are either common, yet ineffective, or less frequently used and have high utility. This study is intended to address the question of which study techniques can improve the efficacy and efficiency of learning for university students as supported by published literature. 2 search engines were used to collect data for this review, PubMed and JSTOR. All papers were written in English, and keywords such as spaced repetition, active learning, active recall, and effective learning strategies were used to search for relevant information. Titles were scanned for relevance, then further analyzed. From the initial title scan, 117 papers were selected for inclusion. However, several papers were removed from the original title scan due to irrelevance. For instance, some papers reflected on the efficacy of various learning strategies in a non-university setting, which lacks to involve the key demographic of this study. Database limits were applied to restrict the scope to research published from 2004 onwards. Abstracts of the remaining papers were examined, and 15 papers were selected for further analysis. Additionally, 4 independent sources were used to add information. In total, 19 sources were included in this systematic review. Let's start discussing the results of this study, beginning with practice testing. Outside of school, testing is often seen as an undesirable necessity of education. Despite this, when practiced in a low-stakes environment, testing can be beneficial for retention and recall. When students were either given a chance to reread a text or to do a practice quiz on the material, the group that took the test averaged significantly higher scores on a final exam days later. Additionally, when combined with feedback, either immediately following each question on a test or delayed when a group was given feedback for all questions after the test was complete, the group that received late feedback averaged better than other groups involved. Testing is beneficial for learning, but when feedback is given, that is, whether an answer is correct or incorrect, learning is supplemented. Feedback enhances the learning process and the retention of correct information. Practice testing is a more effective study strategy than often perceived when it comes to reviewing information, but despite this, it is often neglected by a student as a strategy. Highlighting and underlining, in contrast to practice testing, is a common study strategy. However, marking up texts tends to be less beneficial than often perceived. Highlighting and underlining material gives an illusion of mastery, as described by Brown et al. 2014. In a study conducted on the efficacy of highlighting, undergraduate students were tasked with reading nonfiction articles. Students either simply read the text, highlighted individually, or read a previously highlighted text. When comparing the exam scores, neither of the highlighting groups scored significantly higher than the students that simply read the texts. Highlighting is a skill that must be developed to be useful. Students must learn to process which elements of a text are important and should be highlighted. Too much highlighting and important details are overshadowed, while not enough highlighting signifies that there has been insufficient processing of key details. Unless a student can successfully separate which parts of a text are crucial, highlighting is not typically beneficial. When note-taking, students often attempt to summarize main ideas from texts or lectures. Summaries are more beneficial for retention than directly copying a source. However, this technique could be supplemented with one that is better at promoting active recall. In a study by Rumer et al. 2017, note-taking was compared to practice testing. The results showed that in the short term, students who used summarization and note-taking as a strategy achieved the best results. However, once the time frame between the learning and the testing was increased, practice testing as a strategy achieved higher results than note-taking. In an extension of this study, practice testing was paired with other study techniques. The study demonstrated that practice testing in combination with note-taking was more beneficial than practice testing combined with rereading. While note-taking by itself is not an extremely effective strategy, when compared with active recall strategies such as practice testing, summaries may prove to be a useful learning tool. When summarizing, students must organize and connect pieces of a text. However, there is a discrepancy in what students perceive as summarizing. When comparing the test scores of students that only read the text to those of a group that generated summaries of the text, those who summarized did not score higher than those who simply read. The study found that summaries varied greatly in how they were written, and only the more detailed and organized summaries were beneficial to this individual's test scores. Note-taking can be a useful strategy if an individual knows how to properly summarize. One must be able to select important details and organize them to conform to the larger meaning of a text. Summarizing on its own is not often a sufficient study strategy for active recall. However, in combination with a strategy such as practice testing, learning and achievement increase. Long and mass study sessions, known as cramming, can feel productive for a student. However, dividing studying in preparation for a test leads to better learning and higher test scores. Spreading out studying effectively distributes meaningful practice across time to reinforce learning and slow the decay of memory, promoting long-term retention. Figure 2, as seen on the right, is intended to illustrate a generic comparison between a basic traditional study schedule and one that includes spaced repetition. In a 2022 study, spaced repetition was used to test its effectiveness and students' willingness to implement the strategy. Throughout the study, students were encouraged to use a flashcard app called Anki as a primary study resource. This app utilizes spaced repetition, scheduling the repetition of a flashcard based on a student's performance. Anki was found to be beneficial by students, many of whom reported that the app benefited his or her learning and aided retention. Despite this, in the post-study survey, some students noted that they discontinued the use of flashcards as the semester carried on. Students reported that such revision was often superficially motivated by assessment deadlines, rather than for long-term competency, and oftentimes, students would return to less effective, shallow strategies for learning, such as rereading, highlighting, and cramming. University students are expected to learn a vast amount of information to a high level of detail and understanding. Students must spend most of their time studying. However, without the use of effective study strategies, this learning is often surface level and easily forgotten. Highlighting and underlining are often used to review information and mark important elements of a text. However, this strategy requires more training for correct use than typically perceived. A student must be able to separate key elements from a text and focus only on those details. Summarization and note-taking have similar issues. The goal of note-taking is to extract key elements, then organize and connect the information. While this can be useful as it requires some active processing, students are often misled as to what qualifies as summarizing. Students must distinguish important details and connect them. However, summarizing tends to turn into copying or passive writing. Practice testing and spaced repetition are less commonly used by students, but are more effective and encourage learning and retention. Testing ensures that one is aware of which topics he or she understands, compared to topics that need to be further reviewed. Practice testing encourages the brain to actively retrieve information, in contrast to other strategies which only encourage rereading. Spaced repetition is the process of spreading out sessions leading up to an assessment, as opposed to cramming prior to an assessment. This method encourages active recall, as spacing study sessions allows for some forgetting within the brain. This forgetting process makes it difficult to retrieve information. Thus, when information is eventually retrieved, the effort required to do so reinforces neural pathways and encourages lasting retention. The literature analyzed in this review has shown that study methods which prioritize active recall, as well as study schedules that disperse studying, are most beneficial for learning and retention. A study schedule incorporating these two techniques would be advantageous to retention and future exam performance. This systematic review aims to be a resource for students looking to understand and improve their study habits. In comparison to available papers on effective studying, this systematic review groups multiple study strategies and compares their efficacy and recommends strategies that students should implement in their own studying. Students should focus on active recall strategies, such as practice testing, to retrieve information. They should also distribute learning in multiple study sessions through spaced repetition. By combining these effective learning strategies, students can achieve excellence through a higher standard of learning. I would like to leave you with this thought at the end of my presentation. Learning strategies that implement spaced repetition and active recall require more effort and seem to take longer. However, the utility is embedded in the difficulty. The more forgetting between study sessions, the higher the difficulty to retrieve information. This decelerates learning, but in doing so, it solidifies learning and reinforces neural pathways. Keep this in mind the next time you are reviewing a concept for a biology class, memorizing a text, or even learning a new language. Thank you for your time and attention. Please feel free to contact me at this email if you have any further questions.